Hey everyone, welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We are here with professional bassist Gerald J. Leonard, who is here as a return guest. He was here previously at marketeroftheday.com/181. That was about 5 years ago. And Gerald is an international keynote bassist and culture change expert. He knows so much about productivity in the workplace. He knows more. He's forgotten more about productivity than a lot of us know. He is the author of The Culture is the Bass, 7 Steps to Creating High-Performing Teams. His website is workplace-jazz.com. How have you been these days, Gerald?
I've been doing great, Marvin. I've been doing really, really great. And I'm really excited about my second book, Workplace Jazz.
Nice. So I'm excited to kind of dive into that, because this whole idea of like the musician brain that sometimes applies to like math and science and business, like
Yes.
I've every now and then I get some guests who kind of talks about this, of how like if you have kind of like a brain, like a musician brain, you also do really well, let's say like a computer programmer. And it's kind of interesting how just like a lot of these, like, I don't know, musician principles, like improvising or things going wrong, or like redirecting stress or visualization. It's kind of cool how it creeps into all these other practical areas. So, I mean, I'm excited to talk about it. So yeah, workplace jazz. If I know nothing about anything that you do, or anything about anything, what the heck is workplace jazz in like 30 or 60 seconds?
Okay, so Workplace Jazz in 30 or 60 seconds. That's a good one. So basically, here's the deal. It's basically the concept of learning how to work together and use the techniques and secrets that jazz musicians have used for years in playing in a high-performing organization like a small jazz quartet, trio, and taking those skills and applying them to the workplace. That's it in 30 seconds.
And what does that mean exactly? Like the teamwork aspect, or like what does this mean?
So imagine walking into a club, right? And you have these musicians that get up on stage, and let's say you have some of your favorite horn players. And one of mine is Gerald Albright. Maybe yours is Boney James, or someone like that, or Dave Koz. And they come up to the mic and they got their band with them, and they start playing. They play the melody, they play the chords, the band's with them, and then they start soloing. And everybody stops and starts listening, and they play quietly as the person starts soloing, which is basically a reinterpretation of the melody. And from that point on, everyone's really paying attention, kind of following the changes or the music, but they're really focused on the person who's leading. Now, what happens in jazz is the horn player may lead for a while, and then the piano player says he's going to solo. So then everyone else starts listening to the piano player. And so you have this ebb and flow that happens. And you know what I found out? Because for the longest, I've been working as a musician and as a business consultant. And I started experiencing that when I go to project teams where we're delivering some solution, or rolling out a solution or product for a customer, and the team is kind of vibing and kind of working like a jazz team, it starts feeling the same experience where people are listening. They're focused on who's leading at the time. Maybe it's the business development person, because we're at that point in the project, or maybe it's the developers, or maybe it's the testers, or maybe it's the customer. And so you have this flow. And so there are specific things that jazz musicians have developed. And a part of the process, I figured out basically like a 9-step process of what are the things that jazz musicians bring to the table that a business person could learn and really take their performance with their team to the next level.
And so, giving us a taste of like this 9-step process, what do you think is more appropriate? Focusing on one, or giving us the kind of inch deep 9 steps? What do you think?
Well, I think, looking at all of the 9 steps is really, really important, but there are a couple of processes that are really, really important. So how would you like to play it? I'm open.
All right, let's do it. Let's play.
So if we take the IMPROVISE framework, right, we're basically looking at, basically the 9 steps. And if you look at the word improvise, right, you start with I, which is to improve. And so the first thing a musician does is they work on their skills. They do deliberate practice. They push themselves to grow. And then they focused on measuring what they're doing. They're not just trying to improve just for the sake of improving. They're trying to improve in a way that makes things happen. And they're basically trying to grow themselves and really grow their team, but they want to do it in a measured way. And then they look at the P, right, for improve or improvise. And so with the P, it's basically having a positive attitude. And with a positive attitude, they're basically looking at it from the standpoint of how can my attitude impact my team? For instance, if someone is working on a team and they are playing together and let's say somebody has a bad day, that negative attitude can impact the team. I mean, imagine trying to play and encourage and support someone when you have a negative attitude towards them. You're not going to be very encouraging, and it's not going to swing, and it's not going to groove. It's not going to have that feel to it. And then what about R? So the R stands for risk and reward. And so what the risk and reward is, musicians are willing to take the risks and put themselves out there for the reward of the accolades and the rewards of being able to share their talent and the rewards of really making those things happen. And so from that standpoint, we're going through the improvised process, and it really inspires everyone on the project to just grow in their skills. So I don't know if you had any questions right now.
I mean, I don't really have any questions. I'm just, what's coming to mind as you're explaining a lot of this is how there's like there's the aspect of like everyone's just like a piece of the machine, but then there's also the time for like each person to shine. And then there's also kind of like you're mentioning, like the listening, like not just plowing ahead and doing your performance, so to speak, right? If you're playing the instrument or you're like doing the work or something, there's also kind of like, I don't know if waiting your turn is the right kind of way to put it, but like the just giving other people room to breathe, or like giving other people time to shine. And so there's like all these kind of aspects as I'm kind of absorbing your acronym and these steps. And the thing that's at least kind of coming into my head randomly is that, like, at least when I used to play an instrument in the school band, and there was like work was somehow fun, right? Because I mean, like, what are we doing? We're blowing air under an instrument. We're dealing with like, timing and like rest notes and quarter notes and just the loudness and trying to hit the keys just right. And it doesn't sound fun. It doesn't sound like work. But then when it all comes together and you have like kind of the satisfaction of like, you did a good job, everyone did a good job, there's kind of like that warm and fuzzy feeling. So am I just crazy, or like, do you know what I'm talking about? And is there a way to kind of capture this energy and kind of turn work into fun when it comes to making money and running a business?
Exactly. So basically, let's finish up the process with the framework, right? And that's one of the things that I think is key, is that when musicians get together, they probably, most musicians feel like they never worked a day in their life, because every day they get to do something that not only that they like, but that they love. And it's incredibly rewarding to be able to share that talent, but also to give back and to support other musicians and to be supported. And so there's this camaraderie that happens, and musicians are also one of the only groups that naturally have what they call whole brain integration because of how music impacts your life. So the O stands for being open to feedback. Think about it. Musicians are always open to feedback. The first thing you do as a musician when you start off is you go look for a teacher, a coach. And you want to look for people who are much better than you are, so that you can then play with them, get feedback, show what you're doing, learn from them, and so on. The next one, V, stands for visualization. So with visualization, you're basically looking at how can I, what do I want to be in the future? I'm going to look and find musicians that I want to emulate. I'm going to learn to speak their language. I'm going to learn to grow and become more like them, and to just really grow. The I stands for integrate. Basically integrating and implementing what you've learned from the practicing and the lessons and all the feedback that you're getting. The S stands for support. And one of the things that happens with musicians, especially bass players, and not the fact I'm a bass player, but here's what happens as a bass player. Your whole life is doing nothing but supporting. I mean, everything that you do as a bass player, unless you're soloing, you're simply keeping the bass, the foundation of the song going so that other people can shine. So it becomes kind of like you're surrendering yourself to play this supportive role for most of your career. But there's a blessing to that, because the more you support others, the more they grow and the more you grow. I've become friends with a gentleman who plays with Pieces of a Dream. He's in fact a music conductor and a composer. His name is David Dyson. David, most of his career has been playing that support role. In fact, I write about him in my book. But David is also one of the basses that is one of the hardest working basses on the scene right now. And in fact, he has played with so many people because they know David's going to be there to support me. And then the last thing is E, excellence in execution. And with excellence in execution, it's all about, becoming a virtuoso, doing it right, getting everyone to play their best, and so that everyone comes to rehearsal prepared, ready to work, and have a great time with it. And so it's a framework where not only do I espouse on those concepts, but I have stories from musicians as well as business executives or business consultants or speakers who are also musicians, so they can relate to it, and they share their story of how music has impacted their business and their life. And then I add something else. I add concepts around the neuroscience of each of those principles. And it's amazing the things that I've learned when I was researching and putting that all together. And then there's steps and processes and things that you can take away right away to start seeing immediate results to your business.
And when we're talking about some of these concepts, what comes to mind is that, like, I don't know what it is, but a lot of the musical aspects are like, they're like simpler and they're more exaggerated, and they kind of, the analogy at least helps me to make sense of like the bigger picture in life. And so, I mean,
Yep.
things like you mentioned about in one of those letters, like the whole like the having like a good leader, right? And having
Right.
someone who can, and there's also previously there's like taking the criticism, and it made me think of like, over the years, I had some really like mean music teachers that were so mean, like it didn't matter how helpful they were. It was hard to overcome the meanness. But
Right.
then I had some teachers that were like not mean enough. And maybe they would had good things to say, but they didn't scare you enough into doing it. And then as you're kind of mentioning that in the acronym, it makes you think of like, if we have a mentor or we have like working for like an organization, like sometimes high stress is good. And then also, like, along in that journey, you mentioned about like there's something about like the like kind of the hard, I guess, the hard work and like the consistent practice.
Yeah.
And then there's also like the virtuoso-ness. And what comes to mind there is like, if you play an instrument of any kind, if you don't practice, you just won't be good. And
Right.
sometimes a lot of the elbow grease can overcome like an initial lack of skill. But then some people are like naturally talented and they squander it. I mean, and you can put that on musicians, you can put that on if someone has like good luck early in life with like money or their business. A lot of people can squander it. And so it just, what comes to mind here is like there's a lot of little puzzle pieces,
Yeah.
and like the music and all that helps us just to understand it and to kind of see it in a different lens.
Yes, exactly. And what I really love about this concept, and the way it works out, is that it's very relatable. Um, it's something that you don't have to be a musician to take advantage of these concepts. I mean, we've all, either you played music in school, or you've gone to a concert, or better yet, you've gotten in your car and you turned on the radio, right? I mean, everyone in the world loves music in some form or fashion, whether it's classical, jazz, bluegrass, whatever. And most musicians that are really open-minded and trying to grow, they may have their genre that they kind of specialize in, but they love all good music. I can listen to bluegrass, I can listen to classical. One of my favorite bands is Bella Fleck and the Fleckstones. It's a guy playing the banjo, but he's playing jazz banjo. But sometimes they're playing kind of like the country bluegrass banjo and add some flavor of jazz to it. And it's like mind blowing, because you're seeing someone who's taken their skill of playing the banjo extremely serious, and he's taking it to a whole nother level. And all you can do is sit back and go, wow, I've never heard someone play a banjo like that, you know? And so it's really inspiring. But if you take these concepts, for instance, let's take the concept of surrendering to support. Imagine being on a project team where you have developers, business analysts, coders, um, let's say QA folks are subject matter experts in the technology or the business process. And as the team is working together, let's say it's the analysis part, and everyone knows that the business analyst is kind of driving the show. Well, if everyone comes to the meeting saying with the mindset of I'm surrendered to support, whatever help you need, I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to give you, I'm going to contribute. I'm not going to overstep because I know right now you're leading, and they provide that support. What kind of team are you going to have? You're going to have an amazing team. And then when you get into the development phase of the project where the developers are now leading because they're doing all the coding and the testers are kind of beginning to test things, and everyone now supports them. So you find where when you build something like that, or you take that mentality of working together like musicians work together, then it becomes, work becomes fun. The people that you work with become more than just your colleagues. They actually become like family. They become like best friends. I remember being on some shows and playing a show in St. Louis where a few of the band members I never met. And literally within one or two rehearsals, we were like best friends. I mean, it was like we were emotionally connected from rehearsing. We were, we could like look at each other and know where the part was happening or what we needed to do. And it was just like this spiritual, emotional thing that happens. And it was like it transcended the language of that we spoke because we were speaking the language of music. And so I think
That's
a lot
cool.
of
That's
those things can
powerful.
happen. Yeah, I think a lot of those things actually can happen in the business world as people take this concept and put it into practice in their own life. And I've seen it where my business groups or clients I've worked with where the team has really become like family.
Nice. Yeah, and like very quickly too, and without a lot of the hassles. Like you said, you're performing together, you're musicians together. There's like that instant connection that's like unlike anything else. And in there you mentioned, or there was kind of like a little bit of the idea or of the concept of like coming up with ideas. And I know that I was looking at your blog a couple hours ago, and you had some posts there about like ways to kind of almost systematically like come up with ideas. So can you talk about that a little bit, since we're talking about like the kind of these practical I don't know, outputs of
Yeah.
this kind of the philosophy? Like I think that's like a kind of a cool concept there of like just being able to like think differently and better and come up with ideas. So like what have you discovered lately about this whole idea generation thing?
So here's one of the things that I discovered. A lot of people get together for brainstorming sessions. That's brainstorming is nothing new, right? And even doing a mind map is nothing new, or doing what in the project management world, doing what they call a work breakdown structure, where you take work and you kind of get together in a big room and get sticky notes and everybody kind of gives their thoughts. But here's something that becomes unique in that process, and that is when you understand the neuroscience behind what's happening in the room. Now, here's what I mean. When you are in a networking or brainstorming session and someone has the team is vibing, they're working really well. The person who's leading the group, their brain is producing oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin. Those are neurochemicals that are positive. So that's why you walk away like, man, I really enjoyed that conversation. This was really great. I mean, you have all those nice and fun experiences. Well, guess what happens? That person's, what they're going through gets transferred to everyone else in the room. And in fact, their brain begins to impact the brains of everyone else. And so now the entire team's mindset, their brains and their bodies are producing dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. So that's when you kind of like playing music together. You walk away and you're like, man, this was so much fun. But in the same token, if you were in a brainstorming session using all the techniques, right? But so-and-so has an attitude with so-and-so, or Mary doesn't like Bob, or Bob doesn't like John, and there's some competition, there's some attitudes. Well, their brains are going to start producing cortisol and testosterone, which basically, and it's something that's called, that Daniel Goleman in his book in 1995, Emotional Intelligence, called amygdala hijack. Now, the amygdala basically manages our emotions. But when someone gets amygdala hijacked because of fear and stress, the amygdala shuts down the frontal lobe and puts you in a fight or flight mode. So now you start feeling anxious. Your body literally gets pumped with adrenaline. You know, your limbs are ready to go. You're ready to move. You're ready. I'm ready to get out of here. I'm ready to fight. I'm ready. You know, I'm tense. I'm feeling my muscles are hurting. I'm getting a headache, and that becomes the emotion of the meeting. So the question is, which one of those meetings would you want to be a part of, right? Do I want to be a part of a brainstorming meeting where, you know, oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin are happening and everybody's happy and feeling great about life? Or do I want to be in one where there's a lot of stressors because everyone's doing something that Judith Glaser in her book Conversational Intelligence would call down-regulating, which is criticizing, judging, being negative. Imagine playing music that way, where we're getting together and we're trying to play and groove and have fun, but yet we have attitudes and we're criticizing, judging, and being competitive with each other. Not going to be a good concert. So it's
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just gonna say, like, just the way that you explain some of this, it gets all these visuals in my head, and I just have the visual of how it's like if you have like an orchestra, right, and you have
Yes.
the conductors like the brain, and everyone is a piece of an organism, and everyone's important, but at the same time, everyone is kind of minuscule on the whole large part. But if one person's really bad or toxic or just like I don't know, like distractingly like awful in quality, it can just be the only thing you notice. It can really bring down everything. And so I'm seeing the relationship between there's the abstract, there's the musical, and then how it applies to like the whole business world. This is cool.
Exactly. And it really plays a major part because, you know, another thing that I learned in putting this book together that's amazing. And it's amazing because it's something that I feel like music was given to me as a gift once I really understood, you know, how music impacts your life. But it's also something that other people can experience even if they're not musicians. And it'll be interesting when I tell you how you can experience it. And it is what's called whole brain integration. When you're playing a music instrument, you know, if you're reading music, that's the left brain, but when you're feeling that music, that's the right brain. And in the middle of our brains, we have what's called the corpus callosum, which is like a bunch of nerves that kind of connect everything together, right? So basically what happens is your brain begins to vibrate and there's crosstalk. So the right and left hemisphere are talking to each other, which creates whole brain integration. So musicians, whether you're a professional musician or an amateur musician, rank very high on the scale of whole brain integration. Now, if I'm not a musician, well, how do I do that? Guess what? Meditation. Literally. You know, if I have the Calm app on my phone and I spend 10 minutes a day just calming myself and going through a guided meditation, and I make that a regular practice, my brain will begin to start going through the process of doing full brain integration. And so even if I'm not a musician, I can still develop some of those, you know, benefits of that musicians receive, even though I'm not a musician, if I do some of the techniques and things that I talk about in my book that you can learn that a non-musician can also implement in their life.
And you, when you're mentioning about these like the hemispheres of the brain and like the middle piece, what is coming to mind here is like that a lot of the activities, at least where I feel like really fulfilled,
Yes.
it's when there's like the art piece and the science piece.
Yes.
Like, I mean, like we've mentioned a few times here, like programming or coding, like there's times when like you're trying to figure out how to like structure I don't know, like an object or how to structure the data. And it's kind of like your brain kind of fills up the art piece and the science piece, right? You're like, well, let me think about like these hard calculations and does this math add up? But also, can I use my imagination and imagine, you know, different size blocks or imagine a shape to get a problem solved? and or like, and like even if you think about something like even like like drafting or computer aided design, right? Same kind of
Right.
idea where it's like you're using the logic part, but also the kind of more emotional abstract. And I mean, it relates back to the performing music or listening to music, like you hear like the beats or the what it is that it literally is, but then
Yeah.
also like just what the more abstract is. I mean, it's
Yes.
cool stuff to think about. And even like with the meditation, like I don't do it as often as I should, as I need to, but sometimes if I'm like kind of needing to solve a problem, stressed out, I do the meditation, and my brain, like, I'll kind of go into like playing with like adding and subtracting and doing like math calculations in my head, to then we're going into the emotional abstract. But yeah, hearing the way you're explaining all this, it's like when there's the art and the science combined, those are
Yes.
the most like fun, magical, like just enjoyable activities just in anything.
Exactly, exactly. And it really works well together. And it's amazing just, the gift that we have between our ears, that if we just understood a little bit more about how it works, then we can make work actually work from the standpoint of how do I, what's the best way to work and be productive without being stressed out? Or how do I manage stress throughout my day? Again, doesn't mean that musicians aren't stressed. Obviously they're performing, they're doing a lot of things. And, I don't know if you saw, but I also did a TEDx since the last time we talked. And
Didn't say.
I did one in 2018. And it was called, the title of it was, What If Practice is the Performance? And it was all about the neuroscience of practicing and music. And it really got into the whole concept of how do we use our brains to practice and how do we use our brains for music. But even in that one of the things that came out of it for me was the realization that musicians spend 95% of their time preparing and practicing. Even world-class professional musicians who are playing, let's say they're playing 4 or 5 times a night at a major concert, or orchestra musicians who may perform, let's say 4 or 5 times a week. When you add up the amount of time they're on stage actually in a concert playing, and the amount of time they're actually rehearsing with the orchestra or rehearsing by themselves, preparing, it's about a 95-5 ratio, maybe 92 to 8% or something. But it's a very small amount of time that you're actually on stage. So here's the premise or the point of that is, if I got all of my joy and excitement from being on stage, then I'm going to be miserable the rest of the time because I'm not on stage. I'm going to be preparing to get on stage. I got to practice. I got to work on my craft. But if I take the mentality that everything is a performance, even when I'm practicing, I'm performing and I'm enjoying the process, then if the performance doesn't go as well as I wanted it to, okay, well, I'll do better next time. I'll practice up some more. But I'm going to enjoy the journey now, and life becomes a lot more relaxing and fun because I've kind of put it in perspective.
That's really cool to think about, that like the journey is the destination kind of thing. And if you're if you're always like living in the past or living in the future or living for that 5%, living
Yeah,
for the next big TEDx talk or the next concert, then you'll be miserable a huge percentage of the time. And so there's like that half of it, and then also what I'm getting to, but there's also the part of like uh always kind of be at the top of your game, because there'll be
exactly.
those tiny points in life when it really, really counts.
Yeah,
And you can only be at your best if you were at your best those times when it didn't count. And even just hearing that, I mean, that puts a lot into perspective, because like we all do things where like this was a mistake or this was a waste or I did that for free. But if you kind of look at the big picture, it's way more reassuring that way.
exactly, exactly. And here's something else that came out of that talk. I do talk about it in the talk, because 6 weeks before I gave that talk, and I'm not sure if anybody's had this, I'm sure there are people that are listening that have had this, but if you've ever had something called vertigo. Now, vertigo is a situation where, one, it can happen because you have either fluid in your ear, or you have something with the hairs in your ear, fine part of your ear, that get out of whack, and you lose control and you lose your vestibular system and you get dizzy and the room spins on you. Well, 6 weeks before I delivered that talk, I experienced vertigo, but the vertigo that I experienced was, it must have been a virus or something, but it impacted my right inner ear nerve. I was rushed to the hospital. I was in the hospital for a day and a half, and it literally wiped out what's called the vestibular system, which means I lost at 2 years ago, let's say 2.5 years ago, I lost the ability to walk. I'm 58, so that means at 56, I lost the ability to walk and had to learn how to walk all over again. And so for 1 week, I'm sitting in bed, I'm laying in bed rather, feel like I had a concussion. I get up, the room's spinning, or I'm lightheaded. I can't look at my laptop. I'm a consultant. I have my own company. How am I going to work? And I'm thinking, I'm praying about it, and I start thinking about my talk in the neuroscience. And one of the things I referenced in my talk was that when there's brain damage, if you're a musician and you practice, it activates the brain in such a way that the brain starts working and rewiring itself. So as soon as I could get up, literally, as soon as I could get up, and I came home with a red walker. I still have it. I have it in storage. But I had this little red walker, and I go to my office. I grab my bass, which I grab one of my basses here, and I'm sitting there, and I start practicing. And I practiced for like an hour. It was like, good, I can still play. And I use the walker, get back to my bed, and I lay down. The next day, I get up. I didn't need the walker as much. So I started thinking about what I'd been studying and what was happening, and I really just started being aggressive about playing music and enjoying life. And then slowly, within 3 weeks, by the time I had my first ear, nose, and throat doctor appointment, I literally walked in unassisted. Now, I was still gated, and I was still going through some challenges, but I was in a place now where music had literally restored my ability to walk, had reprogrammed me to be able to walk again. And so when you see me now, and I'm sharing this with a lot of joy and excitement, is because when I gave that talk, I was 6 weeks out of being at the point where I had lost the ability to walk, and I was able to walk on that stage and deliver that talk. And it's probably one of the most sincere talks I ever gave, because I was still right in the middle of it. But that's the power of music. And that's the power of these principles, is that, it's real. It impacts you, and it can influence your company. It can influence your team. It can influence you personally. And that's what it's done for me. And this was my way of sharing those concepts.
And there's like so much cool stuff about what you just mentioned there, because there's, the kind of the under, or the shadow story, I don't know if that's how you call it, but kind of the unspoken part of that was you had this big catastrophic failure right before something really important, and you kind of made it work. You adjusted it, and not only did you like compensate for it, but you used it to make it better than if that kind of bad life event did not happen. So like there's that part of it. But then there's also like that, like you mentioned, like the kind of the unexplained like healing power of music, so to speak, of where it kind of like gets your brain alive and keeps you going, keeps you active, in the same way that, they say if you're really old, like do crossword puzzles just to kind of keep the brain active. But then I'm sure there was also part of like you mentioned happiness in there, and like just kind of feeling like, okay, like there are good things in life still yet to come. And that's even more motivation to kind of, not just sit in the bed all day and kind of rehabilitate. So like, this is all cool stuff.
Exactly. And it made me extremely grateful for the gift that I had been given, and to realize that, I don't want to squander it. I want to use it. I want to share it, but do it from the standpoint of just gratitude, because, I realized that it was given to me that, and provided me at a time where, when I lost that ability, it actually helped me restore that, the ability to walk again, which was, again, it was a journey to go through that process, and it wasn't easy, but, without having that ability, it might have taken me 2 years to get back to the point where I could walk.
Well, so there are so many benefits in our everyday life, in our health, and also in the workplace. And this is workplace jazz.com. This book is called Workplace Jazz, How to Improvise. As we're wrapping up, winding down, Gerald, do you have any like final parting words of advice or anything that you can think of that maybe like out of the best like last 10, 20 years of your life, something that's like really stuck with you? Any like big in scope parting words for us to help us kind of get through life and to get motivated, inspired, things like that? Any ideas?
Sure. So basically, here's two things. One, get on the bandwagon of being a lifelong learner. You know, become a lifelong learner and become a just-in-time learner. Think about what we just have been going through with the pandemic. You know, remember when if a lot of people stayed home and got on the internet, things kind of started coming to a crawl, and things didn't work too well. Now everybody's home. I mean, literally the whole world is at home, and what's happening to the internet and technology? It's getting better. It's streaming faster. So in the last year, large technology businesses have implemented solutions and back-end infrastructure that they were planning on doing 5 years out. And now all those new technologies are now here. That's why we're able to do this without it buffering and all the other things that happen with Zoom and all these other technologies. So if we're not in a place where we're constantly learning, within a short period of time, we're going to be out of date. We're going to lose our station in life, if you will, because technology and things are happening so fast now. And one way to not get overwhelmed with it is just to have the mindset, I'm going to learn something new every day. Even if it's a small thing, I'm going to read something new every day. I'm going to listen to a podcast. If I'm going to think outside the box, I'm going to get in somebody else's head, by reading a book or taking a class. But just getting into that mindset of learning something new every day, then you're going to find yourself growing and getting used to it and being comfortable being uncomfortable. But you're also going to be on top of all the things that are going on that we're dealing with in this life. And the things like the pandemic, it becomes, well, it's another obstacle, but we have the tools to deal with it.
Necessity is the mother of invention, right?
There you go.
Where like some things, maybe in 5 years we'll figure out 5G or video streaming, but then suddenly there's emergency, and then we had to make it work, make it happen. And that's really good advice there, because it's like it prevents you from being overwhelmed. Because like I don't know about you, but I feel so lame when you hear that Bill Gates reads like 50 books every weekend, and then Warren Buffett reads like even more, and you feel so behind the times. But like you said there, if you're always learning, then it seems like it like keeps the muscle strong, and then
Exactly.
you maybe pick up a few things, but it's not so much that like takes up your whole day. And then it seems like if something is important to you, maybe it'll be familiar, or you can kind of go further down that rabbit hole. But it's like I like kind of the duality of that, like, oh, always be doing it, make it a consistent habit, but it does not have to be a fire hose. You don't have to read hundreds of books. You just read a little bit every day, and like the habit is more important than the end result. So this is all really great to think about. Workplace-jazz.com. And anything to know about dropping in on that website, or just go there, see what there is?
Well, on that website, there's a lot of endorsements. There's a lot of media from doing interviews and everything. There's also a music page. In the last year, I've done 3 singles. And so I partnered with a Grammy-nominated producer who worked with Grover Washington Jr. and plays with Gerald Leonard and has done some amazing things. And now he's become my business coach, or music coach, as well as my producer. And so we put out 3 singles. And there's a podcast on there. So I'm just enjoying life and having a great time right now.
And you out there in podcast land, if you want to enjoy life and get just a new way of thinking with this musical side of things, go to workplace-jazz.com, and we will see you there.